A lot of things happen when you clear cut a forest by comparison to its natural functioning. To deal with a few important ones that address water, is that right away you get rid of a huge plant community. And that plant community has been storing and recycling nutrients. So suddenly you have a flush of nutrients into the system, so that the nutrients no longer are being taken up by the plants and the diverse, luxuriant kind of plant community. So they get flushed into the water courses. Those nutrients can create favorable situations for unwanted biological activity in watersheds used for human use. That's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is that old forest, because of its multi-layered kind of canopy, intercepts 30% and more, 30% to 35% of the precipitation that falls on it. And it evaporates it back into the atmosphere, moving it somewhere else where it precipitates again and is filtered and moved around the system that way. Well, that water is no longer intercepted and moved around the system. Instead, it falls right onto the ground. So you end up with the threat of floods, because particularly when you have heavy rainstorms, or here where you get heavy wet snowpacks, instead of that snow being moved somewhere else, it accumulates in the clear cut. It melts faster in the spring, and if you get rain on that snow, which is very, very common on the west coast here, you can have very rapid melting of the snowpacks and floods that occur from that. Floods carry with them another threat, and that's that they erode the slopes, the roads, creating siltation problems in the water itself. In the long term, what clear cutting doesn't plan to do is leave any old trees to die, become snags, and replace the decaying wood, which is the filtration system in the soil.
The GVWD, that's the Water District, maintains that logging does not affect water quality. Well, much of that belief is based on the lack of research linking reduced water quality to logging.
The board doesn't feel that the logging that was going on in the watershed was creating any turbidity levels. Certainly in the research that we've done, there's no evidence that there's a direct correlation between any of the areas that are being logged or have been logged recently and any turbidity.
One of the few studies done by the GVWD was done by Dr. Doug Golding, an associate professor in forestry at UBC.
Dr. Golding's study was done between 1984 and 1988, and he studied two small drainages in the Seymour watershed, the Jameson Creek and Elbow Creek. And one was clear-cut to 19% of the area was clear-cut, the roads were built and it was clear-cut. And the Elbow Creek was left unlogged, and they compared the two over a 4-year period, which is a very short period in the life of a watershed. And the data that came out of that allegedly was that there was virtually no difference in the amount of sediment coming out of both watersheds. Now, but it just so happens that a year after the end of Dr. Golding's study, there was a huge mudslide in Jameson Creek that was directly caused by the logging road that was going into one of the clear cuts.
It's interesting to note that in a recent report from the GVWD, it was revealed that the results from Dr. Golding's study have gone missing. And despite evidence that support the fact old-growth forests produce the best quality water and are more stable than young forests, misconceptions still prevail.
The watershed and the quality of water will be better for us that live in the lower mainland with proper logging and proper logging methods. There's no question about that. That's what all the reports say. You know, trees don't just grow forever. They grow and they get mature and then they die and then they fall down and they're a hell of a mess. They're a fire hazard, so a new healthy forest is better for everyone.
These were ideas that were associated with old growth forests being decadent, being prone to disease, insects, fire, and that old growth forests represented a fairly unstable situation. And if you wanted to maintain a stable forest, a stable land, if you like, you had to get rid of the old growth forests and convert them to younger plantations, which were considered to be more stable. And that philosophy, that management philosophy, which is still the prevailing philosophy regarding the management of these areas, dates, as I said, from 30 years ago or so, and it's fallacious. There are many aspects to that philosophy which have been disproved by more recent research, It's unfortunate, I think, that the research results haven't fully been disseminated and haven't fully been absorbed by the people who are actually managing the forests. So management intervention, if you like, has been creating a need for more management intervention to try and solve some of the problems created by the first management intervention, that is, suppressing the fire. The research suggests that the younger forests are in fact much more susceptible to wildfires, to forest fires, than is the old-growth forest.
We asked Dr. Elaine Golds about the risk of fire in the watersheds.
This is the column that shows the number of fires that have been caused by lightning. And as you can see, lightning caused more fires than any of the other causes, such as recreation, broadcast burning, others, or harvesting. Okay? But what, of course, is important in a forest is not the numbers of fires that you get, but the amount of forest that is actually lost to the fire. Lightning in old-growth forest is not usually that much of a problem. Old-growth forests are damp, the fires don't spread, they tend to burn themselves out, in fact, because the lightning is often accompanied by rainstorms. So what we did was we said this data was not handled in the right way, that it was important to show the number of hectares that were lost, not the numbers of fires. When this data is analyzed as a histogram, what you can see is, and now what we're looking at is the number of hectares of forest lost, okay? The number of hectares lost by lightning-caused fires is incredibly small. It averages out, I believe, to be something less than half a hectare per year. In contrast, the amount of forest lost to fires caused by logging and escape slash burns is extremely high. The important thing to really note here, we're looking now here at the total number of hectares lost to fires over a 30-year period. 5.5 hectares lost to lightning, 85.9 hectares lost to fires caused by logging, okay? But compare that to the number of hectares harvested over that period, and it's almost 4,000. So it's quite clear that what is causing loss of our forests in the watersheds is not lightning, it's logging.
The possibility of preserving the watershed rainforests and the superior quality of water they produce still exists. The watershed still contains some of the largest and finest coastal old growth remaining. Some of the trees here hold the record for North America. In 1992, record tree searcher Ralph Kelman discovered a coastal Douglas fir measuring over 10 meters in circumference and stood nearly 73 meters tall. Lawyer Paul Hundle saw some of the big trees when he went into the watersheds to examine some of the areas proposed for logging.
We were first of all looking for the rationale for logging to try to get a clear explanation of why they wanted to log. When they were pushed to give an answer, what they were saying is that the old-growth forest canopy was in some way subject to disease and fire and was inferior, and that what they wanted to do was replace the canopy with a young, vigorous stand. And when we went in there, what I saw was the best old growth I've ever seen in my life. This is better than anything I've seen anywhere in this region, certainly. And there were trees 17 feet wide. Cedars, healthy, huge, green. This was the epitome of an old growth stand.
The history of our watersheds provides an interesting insight into our present situation. In the 1920s, Greater Vancouver's forefathers were well aware of the importance of maintaining a protected source of water for the Lower Mainland's residents. Early logging was causing concern among health officials. In 1926, the Greater Vancouver Water District, the GVWD, was created. The lands were bought up and the watersheds were closed to logging and mining. The district's first commissioner, Ernest Cleveland, strictly maintained a no-logging policy until his death in 1952. Soon after he died, the district hired its first forester, C.D. Schultz and Company, to survey the state of the watershed forests. In the late 1950s, based mainly on Schultz's 1956 survey report, the GVWD began to reconsider logging. Mr. Schultz's credibility later crumbled when he faced criminal charges along with the Provincial Minister of Lands, Robert Summers, for conspiracy and bribery.